So what if the best way to map out all the life in the ocean had nothing to do with family trees? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive into a totally revolutionary new map, one that's based on a really simple, universal question: who eats what? For centuries, we've been asking this huge question: how is all of this incredible, diverse life in the ocean actually organized across the entire globe? A really groundbreaking new study suggests the answer might be way simpler and, honestly, more elegant than we ever thought. Traditionally, our maps of ocean life were drawn along family lines. It's a field called biogeography, and it's all based on who's related to who. But this new approach just flips that whole idea on its head. It asks a different question. What if we organize life not by their ancestry, but by their profession, by what animals are actually doing for a living out there? And that's exactly what a recent study did. Researchers built a brand new map based entirely on what marine animals eat. And in doing so, they uncovered this incredible hidden order in what looks like the total chaos of the ocean.
So, how on earth do they pull this off? Well, they started by figuring out who belongs to which of nature's little dining clubs.
And the scale of this project is just wow. I mean, they analyzed the diets of over 5,500 different marine vertebrate species. We're talking mammals, seabirds, reptiles, and thousands upon thousands of fish. It's a truly massive look at the ocean's food web. So the key idea here is something called a trophic guild. Now, that sounds pretty academic, right? But the idea is actually super simple. It's just a group of different species that all eat the same kind of food. Basically, it's an animal's job description. Are you a fish eater, a plankton grazer? Well, then you belong to a very specific trophic guild. So by looking at all those thousands of species, the researchers were able to sort them into 11 of these distinct guilds. You've got your classic piscivores, the fish eaters. You've got zooplanktivores who are busy filtering tiny little animals out of the water. Then you have specialists that munch on invertebrates down on the seafloor. And of course, you've got the generalists, who aren't too picky and will pretty much eat a little bit of everything. Okay, so once they had these job descriptions all sorted out, they could start to map out where everybody worked. And this is where a truly stunning global pattern just popped out. It turns out that when you look at the mix of these guilds in any given spot, how many fish eaters live there versus algae eaters, you don't get an infinite number of combinations. Instead, life in the ocean consistently organizes itself into just 6 distinct types of communities. And these communities aren't just scattered randomly. The simpler ones, what they call TCs 1 through 3, they're kind of like the small towns of the ocean, really common out in the vast open water. But the most complex communities, TCs 4 through 6, those are the bustling metropolises, and they're packed into the vibrant, shallow coastal areas. And what this reveals is a really clear gradient, a pattern of complexity. We start up in the polar regions with TC1, which is the simplest community structure. As we move into temperate waters, we find TC2, which has a lot more diversity. Then in the tropical offshore waters of TC3, we see even more fish and invertebrate eaters. And finally, we hit those coastal zones, TCs 4, 5, and 6, which are like a giant megalopolis, just the peak of complexity and specialization. So this naturally leads to the big question: what force is actually organizing the entire ocean into these 6 specific community types? Who's writing the rulebook for how these cities and towns get built? Well, the answer is in the environment itself. The study found 4 key things that were basically the architects of these communities: water temperature, how deep the ocean is, salinity, and how many nutrients, like nitrate, are available. These are the physical rules that determine what kind of biological community can even exist in a certain place. The connection is so strong, you can almost create a simple decision tree out of it. And temperature? That's the main filter. If the water is literally freezing, we're talking below 1.8 degrees Celsius, you're almost certainly in a simple polar community, a TC1. If it's in that chilly, temperate range, you're probably looking at a TC2 community. And if it's warm, but you're also way offshore in deep water, you're going to find a TC3. The environment really does set the stage. But this next part, this is the most profound finding of the whole study. It is the real aha moment. It's an idea called trophic convergence. So what this means is that if you have 2 different places, anywhere in the world, with similar environmental conditions, like the same temperature and depth, they will end up with functionally identical communities, even if the actual species living there are completely unrelated. It's like evolution working all by itself in different places arrives at the exact same solution every time. I mean, listen to how the authors of the paper put it themselves. They say that when you expose totally different sets of species to the same environmental rules, they converge. They organize themselves into the same kind of community structure. It's incredible. And this isn't just a hunch. They proved it with data. Just look at TC4, one of those complex coastal communities. In 81% of the times they compared two different TC4 locations, the species were from totally different evolutionary family trees. They weren't close relatives at all, but they still built the exact same kind of community.
Honestly, this is my favorite way to think about it. Imagine you have two different companies in two completely different countries, but their org charts are identical. They both have a CEO, a marketing department, an engineering team. All the job titles are the same. But the people actually filling those roles, the employees, are completely different individuals. That is exactly what's happening in the ocean.
Okay, so this is a fascinating discovery, no doubt. But what does it actually mean in the real world? Well, this new map isn't just some academic exercise. It's a seriously powerful tool for understanding our changing planet. Because we now know that the environment writes the rules for these communities, we can actually start to predict how they're going to shift as those rules change. Instead of trying to focus on thousands of individual species, we can now forecast how entire ecosystems are going to get reorganized. The old way of doing things was to try and predict what might happen to thousands of individual species as the climate warms. I mean, that's an unbelievably complex job. This new approach is so much more powerful. We can now model how the whole community structure, that entire org chart, is likely to shift when its environment changes. So ultimately, the takeaway here is both simple and powerful. The environment sets the rules of the game. It dictates which jobs are available. And as we change the environment, especially with climate change, we are fundamentally rewriting those rules. And the communities of life in the ocean, they're going to have no choice but to reorganize themselves to play by the new rules. And that leaves us with a really critical, really urgent question. As the fundamental rules of temperature and chemistry keep shifting all across the globe, what is this new map of life in the ocean going to look like in, say, 50 years? How is it all going to be redrawn? Thanks to this research, we're now better equipped than we have ever been to start finding that answer.